In my experience in working with clients, there's a bad word that sometimes gets associated with agencies: retainer.
Yeah, that's disgusting. When I was hiring agencies, I didn't like the hourly pricing. It is pretty straightforward. It's like, look, you're just paying me for the hours that I work. But then there's a misalignment of incentives because you're like, well, then you're making more money if it takes you longer.
Client relationships need to be tied to deliverables, not time. Those deliverables need to be tied to client value.
This is Between Two Pixels, the podcast for anyone who wants to reach and connect with their audience through content and marketing.
Welcome to this episode of the Between Two Pixels podcast. My name's Josh, and I'm joined today by my business partner, Brian Owen. And before we get started, I just have to ask you this question. Is it the Between Two Pixels podcast or Between Two Pixels podcast?
Yes.
Okay, great.
Both are correct.
All right. Well, I'm going to just alternate back and forth until we figure it out.
Yes.
So today I wanted to talk about this topic, and I love this one. It's accountability for agencies, the importance of accountability for agencies. And the reason why I want to talk about this is because I think in my experience in working with clients, there's a bad word that sometimes gets associated with agencies. And you could say it's a 4-letter word, although it's not 4 letters. Mm-hmm. This is what it is. Retainer.
That's disgusting.
Yeah. Doesn't it just, sometimes it can just make you cringe. Like when you say, when we bring up our version, I don't want to, we're going to save this for the end and when we explain how we approach this. But when we start to kind of unpack this or start talking about like some long-term partnership, with a client, they're like, is that a retainer? And we're like, no, it's not a retainer. It's not what it is.
Mm-hmm. It's called reframing, which is important.
Yeah. I think, retainer just means like I pay you and then you don't do anything. Right. Or you do something, but then it's not. Yeah. So there's lots of problems with the retainer, but which I know we're going to get into. We're going to spend some time talking about it. But when we talk about accountability for agencies, like what comes to mind for you? Because I know that you've worked in other agencies. We've worked with clients that have worked with other agencies, and we've come in after the fact or even partnered, with other agencies in this model. So what kind of comes to mind for you when you think about this? Yeah.
Well, to me, accountability, and I think if you tell a typical agency owner, like we're going to hold you accountable, that kind of, it like feels bad, but it's actually something that should be welcomed, kind of like in your personal life, right? To hold you accountable is a good thing. So it doesn't necessarily need to be a bad thing, but I think it does elicit like some scary feelings for an agency because you're like, what does that mean? What are you going to do? Because they think it's going to be like squeezing you into doing stuff that you don't want to, or pinching every penny and making your work unprofitable or something like that. It doesn't necessarily mean to be the case. But I think in terms of accountability, there are certain things I think that we know our industry as a creative agency, whether you're doing focus more on production or on strategy or branding, there are just certain things that are kind of frustrating and like baggage. I think that clients come into the relationship with us and that because they've worked with somebody and they didn't have a good experience. Sometimes that happens. And sometimes it's around, the fact that it feels like sometimes agencies are just like super expensive. They just charge out the wazoo and you don't know where your money is going. You just know that you're spending a ton of it. And it's like, what is the output that I'm getting? So getting some accountability around there. It could be around not really understanding the business. So having, agencies that are kind of like doing their own thing and then they're doing work and it might be kind of good, but it's not actually helping your business grow. And like you as a leader in your organization, like I just have to meet my goals, whether it's like increasing leads or, growing my department, or things like that can be difficult. So there are certain things like, and each one of those things, you need to be able to hold your agency accountable to the things that are important to you, right? So, I mean, you've seen things like this too. So like what else If we're going to bash agencies for a minute, like what else would we say is frustrating about working, or can be, let's just say, working with the wrong agency,
Yeah.
right? Or maybe they're a good agency, they're just not a great fit, right?
Yeah.
What else have you seen?
Okay. Well, I definitely think something that always irked me was just creative driving too much,
Yeah.
and just being like, here's this really cool idea. The identity is around being a creative agency. It's not around being a partner. And so when we started our company, it was like I immediately, and we're going to talk about this later, but put into like our core values partnership. And it's like, that's, to me, that is like the most valuable thing you can bring to the table for a company is to be their partner, have their goals in mind, not just be because you're never gonna be, as a creative, satisfied. Creatives are never satisfied, right? There's always something new. So if you just try to get all of your creative satisfaction out of the work you're trying to deliver for a client, there's no way that you're going to be able to do that with like 100% integrity to like what the client wants. If you're always trying to like, oh, this new awesome thing, I can't wait to do this. And so when creative drives the conversation and not the client's goal, that gets things get off there. And we made that mistake a little bit early on, but that's probably the biggest thing that stands out to me. And then I think just coming in after clients have had bad relationships, it was like this for me when I was a contractor. Before Between Pixels was formed, that I would come in and then people had just like fired their agency and they're like, well, we're just going to use you. And you've kind of talked about this before, but like the importance of getting the message right. Like we would come in and like fix their message and then also produce some content. And they're just like, wow, you guys are like a fraction of the cost of working with an agency, because it can working with a bigger agency. And this was, honestly, like I'm kind of like going back in time. This was 12, 13 years ago, and things were kind of evolving. And now agencies have changed over time, and I think are better at adapting to like the speed of how things are moving. But 10 or 12 years ago, it's a completely different story. Yeah. If you were hiring an agency partner, chances are they were doing like big time ad stuff, or they were placing billboards, they were placing more like regional or national ads or whatever. They really weren't equipped to do what was happening then, when content production was really starting to get like be spread out to people like me at that time. So I'm kind of like setting the context for how it's changed, but I think that's part of it. Yeah,
I was gonna say there's a couple more. I'm just thinking back to my days when I'd hire agencies, what was frustrating. So it's kind of a fun exercise. It's cathartic. But but a couple things. One is when you hire an agency because they've done a lot of really innovative work, and you're like, that's exactly what we need to spark innovation and creativity. And then you end up hiring them and they just become like just producing stuff that you ask them to do. And we're just like, we paid you to bring us new ideas, not to kind of create what we told you to do, right? So kind of like a lot of it surrounds having the right people you're working with. The other thing is, there were occasions when we would find an agency and they had really good people. You talk to them, you're like, man, they're really sharp. They know what they're doing. They've done great work. And then you're assigned your team, and then you're kind of like, wait a second, like these are not the people that I talk to, right? Yeah. And they might be good, but you're paying rates for a specialist or someone that's like really, really good, but then they're assigning people that just don't have a lot of expertise, and they don't have the processes in place to make sure that the work is at that level, right? Or there's even been cases when the person that they assign to you just isn't great to work with, and they don't understand how important the client experience is. Yeah. You're bringing someone as a partner. They better build good relationships with your internal staff, and they better be good to work with. They better be fun, like all of those kind of things you want. And that doesn't always happen, right? So a lot of these things can go sideways if you don't pick the right agency partner, and you just have to be careful about that. But
well, and I think it'd be helpful to let people know too. So if someone's watching this and they are a marketer, or they work as the team lead for their company in the marketing side of things, or they're in charge of hiring an agency to work with. Your background is like you actually have worked both at another agency and in some capacity, but then you also worked for a corporation and you hired agencies and outsourced stuff. So I think that's really helpful because like you actually have been in both shoes. So like, tell me a little bit about that. Like give us just like a little bit of that background because of what that was like and what you were doing. Yeah.
So it was a big brand in the Northeast, and we had multiple brands, 14 or 15 different individual business units or divisions that was in travel and hospitality and restaurants and food, all kinds of industries. And when I came in, we had an internal creative team that had been there for, I don't know, decades, right? So there were some things that needed to happen. And what happens often is you get a mix of really good, talented, innovative people that are coming with new ideas that you want. And then you've got some people that, just aren't the right fit for the position, honestly, and are not necessarily keeping up with the trends. And so then you kind of have a team that is underperforming, not because there aren't good people, but because it's really harder to get the right mix of talent when you're at a legacy organization like that. So it was a lot of just kind of trying to figure out like, what is our capacity? It's almost like if you're coaching a basketball team and you're just like, well, this is our team. We have to figure out a way to make this team work. Are we going to be, what are we going to do? A team that runs the ball up the court? Well, we got a bunch of slow players. Like we can't do that. So you have to kind of figure out a way to balance that. So a lot of it was trying to figure out what do we have the capacity to do, and then just being realistic about that, and then trying to figure out how can we outsource stuff. So that was a lot of that exercise, but then really learning a lot about outsourcing and what we're looking for in a partner. And honestly, that's when kind of you and I came together. We kind of merged those two things and said, let's design this thing based off of the experience of someone that's hiring somebody. So like kind of reverse it rather than optimizing it for our like. It's almost like we're like, rather than start a creative services business, let's start a business that serves clients and design it that way, and then figure out the business side of doing the creative, right? So it's almost like being designed for the clients and addressing some of the stuff that was frustrating to me, and that I think you had pretty strong convictions about on the creative side too. So
no, for sure. And I think I remind our staff of this all the time, but we are a service business. So it makes a lot of sense to talk about, some of learn some things from like hospitality, specifically, but we do creative, but we do it through the method of being a service business. Like that is ultimately what we are. Yeah. We are being hired for a service.
That should be a whole nother topic, because the whole idea of what does it mean to be a service-based business are things that sometimes agencies get frustrated about, like clients changing their minds all the time. I'm like, guess what?
Customer's always right.
They're humans. You know what I mean? They're going to change their minds. And so we have to adapt. It's not our clients' job to not change their minds. They're going to make the decisions that are best for their business, and we have to make sure that we respond and coach them and direct them the right way. But that is a shift. That's a different mentality versus a protectionist, like they keep changing their minds, where that's a bad thing. It's going to happen. So like, what do we do with it to make it good? Right?
The difference of like protecting the creative versus, or the ideas versus protecting the client's goals and making sure 100%. That you just we just let those go. If it's off and it's not gonna hit what we want, and we just let that go. It's like, I kind of say, it's like you want to have like an hold your ideas like with an open hand. Like let those things go. So like some of the problems that I feel like I see with agencies is the cost. And then you have, let's just say retainers, okay? It's an hours-based mindset. Defining the price can be a challenge because, especially I would say on the technology side, like we see this with web, is that there is a price range. And then it's like, well, this is what we think we're going to do. And then you start going down that road, and it's like, it just expands and it just grows, dude, sometimes to like a very large number. And I see that being like a model sometimes in agency world of just like having like no defining a price. great people cost money. We talked about this before, but just like depending on, what the skill set is. So, when you're going to work with an agency, a lot of times, depending on what it is, if it's technology, a technology piece, if it's a web piece, if it's really great creative, that it can be expensive. Outsourcing is going to, if the agency can't do it all internally, then they're going to have to outsource it. I mean, we've worked with, partner with agencies that will outsource stuff to us just because they have a high volume. And so, obviously there's a markup on those things back to the client. And then the last one is that retainers aren't always tied to deliverables, because there might be competing, and ultimately they are, but there can be like a retainer arrangement that's like a bulk of hours, and it's like, all right, we're going to apply these to the things that need to be applied to in this quarter or this month or whatever, but they're not necessarily always applied directly to a deliverable.
Or even worse, it could be part of the retainer is the privilege and the right to have us available to work on your behalf, which is, you talked about there being a separation from the money and the deliverables, right? So like there's an investment, and that investment has to tie to deliverables, but the investment has to tie to deliverables. The deliverables have to tie to some kind of client goal. So the farther you get, those are two different levels. The farther you get away from the first one, the farther away you are from the other one. So then your investment becomes really far away from your business goals if you're not managing that.
Yeah, and I think this kind of goes to like the next thing I wanted to talk about, which is that agencies need to be focused on value-based pricing, not hours. This is a shift that we made several years ago. I mean, at this point, probably 8 or 9 years ago. Shifting your mind away from what does this cost to what is the value. So when you're doing what does it cost, you're doing like, well, what do they want? And you have to get every little thing, and you itemize everything out. And then if something changes, you add a little bit more to it, or whatever that is, which is a very transactional experience. And it's like, we've kind of talked about it like, well, if you're using, so let's just use it as a comparison to retainers. If you have a retainer with a client and you're doing hours-based retainer, and you're like, all right, well, we wrote a script and it took me an hour because like I got the right amount of coffee to water ratio in my brain. And then I completely...
I already had some ideas in the back of my mind teed up.
Yes, I did. I had some snacks. I crushed it. This thing is amazing. Okay, so you're going to charge 1 hour for this amazing video, ad, fundraising thing, you fill in the blank, social idea, whatever it is.
Logo design's in that category too.
Logo design. People pay, clients, there's logos that you can go and look and see like the most expensive logo. And it's like, you pay $1 million for some brand, logo desigine. And well, if it,
I have a horror story about that.
What if you got, well, maybe you could share that. Maybe we need to do a whole nother episode, which is agency horror stories.
Yeah, I've got a bunch of them.
Okay.
Yeah.
But imagine, so then is it right to just charge 1 hour for that? I mean, the client got a great deal but it's a flip side too, because then if you are just doing a bunch of wheel spinning,
right,
the client's not getting value for that. So your work is getting devalued. The client's work is not getting valued. The client's deliverables aren't getting valued when you just go hourly based. So when you switch to value based pricing, you look at like, what is the client value of this thing that we're delivering? Then what is the industry standard kind of like rate that the client would say like, yeah, I'll pay that. That's the right price for that. I mean, this is how everything else works. When you look at retail, you look at what the value of something is. Yeah, there is a little bit of like, what do the materials cost? But this is why you see like, markups or profits are higher on certain products than others, right?
The profit varies drastically.
Drastically, and it's because of the industry, the value of the person is willing to pay for it.
Yeah.
And I know that might sound bad to someone listening, but like, you guys are just marking it up based on what I'll pay for it. And in a way, it works both ways though. So I will say, do you want to talk a little bit about value-based pricing? Or do you have anything else to add to that?
No, I think that there are several downsides. I didn't like, when I was hiring agencies, I didn't like the hourly pricing. It is pretty straightforward. It's like, look, you're just paying me for the hours that I work. But then there's a misalignment of incentives because you're like, well, then you're making more money if it takes you longer. Like that's not what I want, right? And so if you look at like a TV ad as a good example, if you kind of have different categories of TV ads, like I don't think it should matter how long it takes somebody to do that. Like it should be the same price, right? And so what we try to do is do value-based pricing, and that we know our market position is to offer high-end production marketing services, but to offer them to companies that might not otherwise be able to afford them, right? So small to mid-sized companies that want really good stuff. So we try to price a little bit underneath what the market they might expect from like bigger agencies, right? Mm-hmm. And so that just kind of makes more sense. And so we kind of absorb that. So like what you're saying is, if we'll do fixed price stuff, and I think that makes more sense. And sometimes we make very little money off of something because it's not something that is valued really highly, right? It might be something that we just have to come in the studio and film and just have somebody. It's a really straightforward edit. There's not a lot of complication to it. We're not going to charge as much for that as we would something that requires like a completely original concept and idea that's never been done before, right? That has a higher value. So I think the value-based pricing does align business goals. And then it rewards, efficiency, and it rewards quality. And so, but we're taking on some of the risk. So that's a big part of it, is like we're taking on risk when we do that, because if it takes us longer, it doesn't matter. We don't charge anything else, right?
Yeah.
If it just takes us longer to do it. So
yeah, and I do like that. I feel like that for our teams, that exercise is a creative process in and of itself. I've seen the thing where it's like, create an ad in this, mm-hmm. 1x1 box. That's all you get. Mm-hmm. So whatever you want to do it inside this box. Yeah. Was that creative or not creative? You have to be very creative to create a good ad in a 1x1 box. And so it can be frustrating to me sometimes when it's like, well, no, I need resources to be creative. And it's like, no, you don't. That's actually the definition of being creative, is I'm asking you to be creative. Right. With those sources.
Yeah. So constraints. That's the whole idea, is constraints are a good thing. They force you to take ideas and problem solve within a limited area. And mm-hmm. that takes a lot of creativity. And that is something that is very specialized for sure.
Yeah. It's like, you want to be creative? Okay, tie one arm behind your back. Now do the Larry Bird left-handed game. That's pretty creative. Play the whole game left-handed. Yeah, exactly. So I would say, when we're talking about the importance of accountability for agencies, so we just talked about value pricing. Mm-hmm. So value-based pricing, not hours. And then the next one that I think about is client relationships need to be tied to deliverables, not time. And then those deliverables need to be tied to client value. So client relationships mm-hmm. tied to deliverables, not time. So we don't want to have a relationship with a client that's just, how many hours am I giving you? We want to talk about what are the things that we're actually going to deliver for you. And then those things that we deliver need to be tied to client value, not necessarily just a number of like what they cost, but what value are we delivering? And what we've seen like over and over and over is, if we can, and you've presented this to our staff before, but if we can move what we deliver up the list of things that a client finds valuable, they're more willing to not just pay for it, but treat us in a way that is different. It's not mm-hmm. we're not just delivering a video that's going to play. Yeah. We're delivering something that's going to create a higher brand affinity, right. or move someone.
Or grow a division.
Grow a division. Yeah. So I think that's really important. But so what are your thoughts on that? First, client relationships mm-hmm. being tied to deliverables, not time, and then deliverables tied to value.
Yeah. I think from the very beginning, you have to have it as the inverse. You have to start when we do proposals and we talk to clients and we say, okay, let's diagnose your problems and opportunities, and then let's prescribe something. When we prescribe it, and what I would recommend is make sure that you're getting prescriptions or recommendations or plans or proposals, whatever they are, that start with the client value. So we'll always say, here's what we're trying to accomplish. You came to us because you want to grow this division. You came to us because you want to recruit more people for your team, whatever that might be. So everything kind of starts with there. Usually there's more than one of them, but we'll start with those bullet points at the very beginning. And then we'll tie those to deliverables, because that's kind of part of what an agency like ours can help is, you've got a goal. I want to recruit more MAs for my healthcare company, right? So then we can say, okay, well, here's how we've seen that be successful. Here's the type of content, the type of distribution, the kind of channels we use. And so then you go to the deliverables, and then those are all priced at a fixed price based off of what you're going to deliver. So I think if you align all three of those things, starting with the goals ultimately and going back to the deliverables, then you're at least going to have a direct line between the three, and there's not going to be as much of a disconnect. Versus just kind of, estimating about how long something's going to take, and you say, we'll just give you a bucket of hours. I mean, that can be a misguided or misdirected. So again, the accountability of like, we hired you to help us grow our division. We hired you to help us recruit more people, more staff. That's not working. It doesn't matter if you delivered something or if you gave us a bunch of hours. It's not helpful for us, right?
Right.
And so that's the accountability.
No, that's great. Well, it's kind of a good transition point because I love to talk about, obviously, we feel passionate about this, right? Like we're speaking very passionately about how we feel about it. And I think the reason why is because this all kind of poured into why we built the company the way we did and why we kind of structured our core values the way that we did. And you and I kind of started working together in like 2013, like really right after the company started. And then when you came in and joined the company as my business partner, we had a lot of alignment on these things already. And it was just like in the DNA of the company. But talking about, the core values, we say quality, consistency, and trust. And so, I kind of think about it like an equation, like quality plus consistency equals trust is the way I like to talk about it. But we define quality as client value. And the example that I give a lot of times is like, go read an Amazon review and you can see if someone values something. Quality is defined by the client, not by us. A lot of times agencies get this inverted. And I think this is some of the problem that we see with accountability with agencies, with the customer, is because I think quality is me doing something good and that other creatives are going to look at it and be like, that's good. Like quality is objective. It's just good. But the reality is quality is subjective and that the client is the one that determines it. And my thing about Amazon reviews is like you go read a review and it's like, why does this thing have all these 5 stars and then like a handful of 1 stars? And it's because the 1 stars didn't have their expectations met. And when the expectations are met and the value is delivered, it's like, that's great. Those guys with the 5 stars were like, yeah, I know this thing cost $7 and it's probably not going to do everything. Yeah. The people in the 1 are like, this thing broke after I did this with it. And it's like, well, it's because your expectation was like different than what these other people's were. So, quality. Then the second one is consistency. And so this is also very important in this conversation because we say consistency is basically predictability. And sometimes I think predictability is probably the most important thing for a client. Yes, value is important, but the predictability factor for someone who's going to partner with an agency for a client, someone who's maybe in the role that you had in the other company that you worked for, you want predictability. You want to know this company's going to deliver every time. I can't be spending this money if it's inconsistent. And I think this even goes that if you mess up. We're not saying that predictability is perfection. We're saying predictability is even if we mess up. I think we've seen this with our clients. They know we'll make it right.
Yeah. How do you recover?
We'll say we'll eat the costs. We'll fix that. We'll do whatever we need to make it right. Yeah. And so those two things then lead to trust, which for us, we say long-term partnerships. So our goal is long-term partnerships that are built on trust. So it's built on delivering things that a client values, doing it with consistency and predictability, and then building trust. Because I tell this to our staff. People say a lot of times, you've heard trust is earned. You got to earn their trust, and that is true to some extent. But ultimately, like, trust is a gift. And so the clients have to eventually give you that trust. A client doesn't ever have to give you trust. And that's up to them, if they want to do it or not. We want to earn it, and that they eventually give it to us. But the flip side is, internally, we also say, just to kind of like turn it on its head, that like we have to give trust to each other. So I just have, on our teams, it's like, hey, this is what this client needs. This is what they're asking for. And I'm going to trust that you're going to get it right. Mm-hmm. And this is your job. And now go do the thing that we're asking for. So I just wanted to kind of lay those out, because the next piece of this conversation is to talk about our solution and our answer to the retainer model. So you and I kind of came up with this a while back, and I think it was in like 2016, mm-hmm. around that time. And we've been using it since then, but it is our content plan. So I wanted you to talk a little bit about that and how this began, why did we do it? I think it's going to be obvious why we did it as a comparison to the things we've been talking about, and then kind of how it works.
Yeah. Excuse me. So I think it did come out of really trying to understand what some of the problems were we were trying to solve. So you've got two different types of work. You've got essentially project-based work, where a client will come and say, we need this thing done or this service, and we're going to pay you for it, and then we're going to kind of move on to the next project. And then there is the retainer model, which is more of a consistent, we're going to work with you over the course of a number of projects, typically like at a fixed price and a fixed scope, but absorbing some of the flexibility and kind of like seasonality of it. So a lot of the issues were because the project-based model is difficult, and it's very difficult in agencies, which is why so many agencies try to get retainer work, but most of them aren't successful. So it's probably between 20 and 35 or 40% of the work through the typical agency is like retainer-based work. The vast majority of it is projects that you just have to keep bringing on, right? So that does put a lot of pressure on the agency, and that pressure then, because of the challenges, it gets transferred eventually at some point to the clients, right? So the uncertainty of having a staff and not knowing where your revenue is going to be coming from in 2 months, that's really nerve-wracking, right? Mm-hmm. And we've been in that situation before when we did a lot more project-based work. So there are certain things that are really difficult on the agency. On the client, it's hard because you don't have a consistent team that you're working with, and so you're kind of working with a company and just kind of hoping you get the same people. So if you do a project in January and then another one in April, it's not guaranteed that you're going to have the same group, right? There's a lot of administrative overhead involved. So if you think about there's a lot of discovery. Okay, what is it that you need to do? Let me get you a proposal. Let's negotiate the proposal. Let's take the proposal back to my manager, and then my manager's got to take it to the CEO and the board, and then let's go back and let's make some changes to it. And then by that time, you're 3 to 4 weeks in, and you've already spent hundreds of hours just to try to figure out how much this $10,000 project. And you're just like, for crying out loud, that's a lot of time wasted that doesn't really deliver value. Mm-hmm. So we're trying to solve a lot of these things. And how do we create a model that has the benefits of project-based work and kind of remove some of the obstacles we talked about or frustrations with retainer-based work, right? So we wanted to create something where there was transparency and accountability around the cost, around the deliverables, and all of those. So that's kind of where we came up with our version of the retainer, which is deliverables-based. And the other thing on the internal side is it's, if you're budgeting, if you're running a marketing department, you're putting your dollars into months slotting out the month for the year. And so if you put $5,000 or $50,000 in there, that's your budget. So you kind of need to know, and managing the complexity of working with agencies on a project basis, I have to figure out my velocity, how fast I'm spending the money, what we can absorb. Are we going to be able to do these projects? Because I don't even know if we can do these. I might run out of money in October.
Well, and the thing too that I'm sure you'll get into is that how do you even know that you've laid out the right amount of money in your budget to do it?
Yeah.
Because one of the things that we try to solve with that is all right, well, and I don't want to get to the end too soon, but when we lay out a plan and when we lay out a content plan, it almost works it does work like a marketing strategy, but it also works like a budget that then our client can go take to their supervisor and be like, this is my strategy for the year.
Right.
Yeah, Between Pixels came up with it. And you can look at it, you can see it's like, oh, this looks good. And there's flexibility for it to change. But then at least you kind of know this is what this should cost. And then there's enough money to cover at least this much stuff.
Yeah. That's the thing, is you kind of want, as a client, you want to have your cake and eat it too. You want the predictability of a budget that's fixed, so you know how much money you're going to spend. But you also want unlimited flexibility with like what you get out of that. And so that's what you say, the tension to manage, right? That's a term that you like to use, right? So it's not a problem, it's a tension to manage. And we try to manage it for clients by kind of taking on some of this risk, right? So it all starts with whether it's ours or another program, a good retainer model. We call it a partnership because it's not what you would think of as a retainer. Starts with like a really good strategy, understanding that you're not going to have all the information in front of you. Things are going to change. You're going to have good ideas along the way. We hope that's the case, right? But ultimately, you want to start with something, knowing what do the next 12 months look like for our company? And then what do we need our agency partner to support us with, whether it's with marketing or content production or whatever. So it always starts with that, which is a good discovery. So, baking that stuff in. And then making sure that what we ended up doing was as you know, was turning all of our services into products. So like fixed products. So we could say, if the strategy is around, includes advertising as a good example, right? So if we say, we feel like there's a really good campaign concept and we're going to need to produce 4 brand ads throughout the course of the year, we can then go ahead and slot those into tiers to be able to say, well, you need a tier 5 brand ad, tier 6 brand ad, tier 3 brand ad, and we have prices for those. So we can kind of slot those in every quarter. And so we don't know what the concept is yet. We don't know what it's going to be, but we do know that this is about how much money you want to spend. And we can have a relatively good idea of what that's going to get you, right? And so you can do that. You can say, we need to do a better job of doing kind of some bottom of the funnel marketing. And so that might be case studies. So let's build out 6 or 7 case studies. So we kind of slot those into tiers. We put those on. And then all of a sudden you have what starts to look like a roadmap for the entire year that puts placeholders in there. And so you can budget that. Yep. And then the flexibility comes in where you say, like, actually, we only need 2 case studies, but we have this event coming up and we need pull-up banners and we need these real cool video, interactive video banners or inactive banners that kind of tie back to whatever it might be. Then we can kind of move things in and out and kind of move stuff. So you get the benefit of having consistency around your budget, but flexibility with like how you use that. Yep. Right. So a lot of it came about of being like, what are the pain points and the frustrations, knowing that, corporations need to budget in advance. And so they need to do that. So we're talking to people now who are like, we're having conversations because they know they want to budget in 2025. Yeah. So they're trying to figure out how much they're going to spend with us because they have to put in their budget and they're not ready to work yet, but that's important to them. Yeah. So building that with a flexibility is kind of where we found to be success, which is why the vast majority of our work comes through this kind of partnership, because it ended up being just a lot better for clients too.
Yeah. And I'll say too, like you kind of even downplay the amount of like effort it took to build that menu of products, because it is very, it's very detailed in that. And one of the things that we do in it is that the tiers are pricing tiers. And then there's kind of like different types of content across that tier. Right. So say like tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, they kind of have price ranges. Mm-hmm. And then the cool thing about it is like, you can look and see like, all right, so this is working, let's say work backwards from a client. So a client might say like, hey, I only have X amount to spend this year in my budget, or I need to reduce our budget this year because of cutbacks, but help me figure out a plan. So when you're looking at the tiers, you can kind of look at the price points and be like, all right, figuring out a solution based on their goals. Do we need to do like an ad with actors, or do we need to do like a motion design piece, or in this tier range, are we going to do like something more organic, like a social campaign? And so we can kind of look and see like how many pieces from each tier does it work? And then each tier and content that fits into each tier. So I say each content category that fits into a tier comes with apple to apple comparisons of stuff we've done in the past. Right. So that you can see like, well, if you're going to do that product, let's say a tier 4 brand ad or something like that, we can show you 3 examples of what a tier 3 brand ad, tier 4 brand ad looks like. You want to do a tier 3 motion graphic, so in the same price point, but it's a motion design. You look at it, you're like, oh, that might be a little too much for what we want to do. That I don't know if we need it to be that good. And we're like, all right, well, let's look at what a tier 2 motion design piece looks like, and it just have that flexibility. Oh, I could do 2 of those for the same thing. Yeah. So it's really I feel like it's super helpful because it takes a lot of that mystery out of it. You're able to like really see what something could be and then say, oh, I see. Yeah, that's worth, let's do that. I see the value, you know, it helps get that like value position correct. And then the other thing that I think is really helpful with this is the credit system. You don't like it when I talk about this being like a bucket of coins from Chuck E. Cheese.
My experience with Chuck E. Cheese, it's just more the fact that, you know, we were joked that when people be like, you don't want to go to Chuck E. Cheese, you'll get COVID. I'm like, COVID wouldn't survive there. COVID would be absolutely destroyed there. So that's probably the safest place to be. So it's not the bucket of coins. It's, I think, the overall experience I had growing up at Chuck E. Cheese. And now having kids thinking, sorry Chuck E. Cheese employees, but like the perception is that it's just not a place you want to go if you want to stay healthy.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I mean, that's probably legit. But the thing that so not to downplay our credit system, because I think it's great. So one of the ways that we get around this conversation around hours and just like the price associated with hours and all that stuff is by going to this kind of like credit system model. So still staying with value-based pricing. So if you look at, we price everything that we're going to deliver in our big menu of things, of deliverables. So we productized the types of work that we do. And then we give those things a credit value, which is really tied to a price, but it is a credit. It is a credit value. It ultimately becomes tied to a price, but at first it's just a credit value. So that credit value is based on like our standard rate, so we know kind of like what it might cost. But then the cool thing about it is, depending on how much a client is doing with us for that year. So if someone is on a really big plan where they're doing a lot of content, their price per credit goes down. So it's like we're not having to necessarily talk about changing the price, because we want to talk about value-based pricing. So this allows us to say like, this is always going to cost this many credits because that's the amount of value that it is. But you're just going to pay less for it because we're giving you a better per credit rate. Right. So for the year, you know, clients can get a significant amount off, you know, depending on the amount of content they're going to do with us. I would say like 20, maybe 20% to even more.
10 to 20. Usually 20 is high, but that's, you know, that it's a significant discount. And so to your point, that was because we, you know, if you're spending $100,000 or more with an agency, you want to get better pricing, right? And so that was our way to solve that. And so it's basically, like you said, volume discounts, so that even though something might be 100 credits, what somebody pays really depends on how much work they're going to do with us. Part of it is because honestly, when we start working with somebody as a partner, if that's the 5th project we do, it's going to take us a whole lot less time. So we're actually saving time. So some of that is just passing those savings back because we already know your brand, we know the messaging, we kind of know what you like. And so it takes a lot less time preparing in the pre-production phase if it's a video project. So why not give some of that back? Yeah. And so it kind of rewards longer term partnerships because we're way more interested in that because, again, we love the business side of what we do and helping clients be successful. Yeah. And then just how we do that through content is kind of just happens to be our special skill set. So
yeah, and I think the final piece in related to the credits is the accountability piece. Because when you see a plan, when you see a marketing plan for the year, and it has all of the suggested deliverables, and then it's got credits associated with each, and then you can see that adds up to the total value of credits that you're paying for the year. As we do those things, and they get marked off. Well, I mean, it's pretty much like a balanced budget at that point. Yeah. You look at it. Now, the only time that would change is if like the agreed upon scope might be like, hey, I want to jump from a tier 4 to a tier 5, or we want to do 3 tier 4s. Yeah. And you're like, okay, well, so in order to do that, we're going to have to cancel these other 2 things you already have planned later in the year. Or you're just going to have to, we'll have to reprioritize those. And if you run over, then there'll have to be some type of makeup. Yeah. Or we'll sometimes leave unallocated credits because of those things that pop up. And then the final piece of this is that we do allow clients to roll over 10% of their credits to the following year.
Yeah.
So if for some reason they're like, we just didn't get to everything, then we're like, all right, cool. Well, you can roll over 10% of it. And we've seen clients do that. And I've even had clients where a previous year they were like, you roll over, and they wanted to increase because they're like, last year we just didn't have our stuff together. Next year we're ready to go. And I've seen clients roll 10% over, and then instead of increasing, just say like, oh, that's cool. Yeah. Or even roll over and then increase. So I feel like that's pretty much it. But in general, I've really enjoyed, once clients start to understand what it is, they really like it because they're like, no, it's great. I don't have to think about it. Yeah. All I know is I'm paying you this much a month. And then I know that I can always see every month we're going to do a meeting. We're going to look at the credits. We're going to see what we've tracked, how it's run down, where we're at, if there's been any like scope changes or anything like that, how we're doing on our plan. Because it's really great. I mean, I think for a lot of our clients, they have to report back to their boss, and it just, it provides a lot more intentionality around, the marketing plan. So I think, ultimately, if you do a retainer or categorically a retainer, we don't call it a retainer, as I said, but if you do it the right way, in the right way, there's different flavors of it. We just happen to think like we've worked really hard to get ours to the point where we think it works really well, but it has to be designed around the interests of the client. Like that's the most important thing, right? So we basically designed it that way. So I think for if you're looking to get into a partnership / retainer relationship and you're running an internal team, there's just a lot of things you need to make sure that it's structured to be in your favor. Now we were able to figure out a way to make it in the best interest of the client, but in also a way that is in our best interest too. So we're happy to give discounts because we can work more efficiently, right? And like you said, the unallocated credits is what allows us to absorb some of the things that they say, we know there's going to be more work that we can do, but if you give me a bigger discount, I'll go ahead and budget this because I want to pay the same price every month. And we know we're going to have stuff we want to do towards the end of the year. We have no idea what it is yet. So that's where that comes in so you can get your kind of discount and then figure out what you're going to do later. So it's really provides, it's designed for the client. I would say that's the most important thing, is just kind of look at all the different terms and how it's structured. What happens with overages? What if we don't get everything? How do you price things? All of those questions need to be answered to make sure that you're kind of in a good relationship with the vendor. Yeah.
So
awesome. Well, this has been a great episode. I hope everyone found it useful and helpful. Yeah. I know. Yeah, you did. That's perfect. But I think with all of the stuff that we want to do on this podcast, we hope that there's a little bit of an insight into kind of how we work, and then also just maybe folks can glean a little something for their own benefit and help them make decisions. Because these are stuff that, these are things that our clients are always having to deal with and having to try to decide what to do and how to tackle these things. So hopefully everyone enjoyed this, and we look forward to seeing you next time. We won't see you, but you'll see us, right? That is how the internet works. But if you've enjoyed this, go ahead, like and subscribe, share with a friend, and we'll see you next time.